Oh, okay. Are you done?
Yes, I get that. One more minute. Think about what you're gonna say. Who's gonna say it? So we're not wasting time. You're pausing. No, I'm not gonna start. Start over there. Yes. Start over there. See this one? You don't know where I'm gonna start. So you know wherever I start, that's the team that says the most.
Doing this.
Supposed to say the most.
Feel like that group.
That was.
I would say
What do you
that
say?
And then if it's confused, we just move your finger over.
the knower.
Okay.
Like
What am I
that.
saying? Never mind.
30 seconds. And I'm expecting some movement on your notes. That is, you've actually thought about each one of these questions, have written at least a few things, especially while we discuss. You have about 20 seconds left. By the way, for those of you who still don't have the textbook, I understand. I'm not an unreasonable person, so I'm not just expecting you to magically know the information without that. So I've texted the previous class to make sure they get their book. I don't think so. I think that was sort of a first come, first serve at that point. But hopefully those kids are pretty, responsible. They're like you guys.
I told them all in math class yesterday. I was like, "You guys have the KOK books?" They're like, "Yeah." And I was like, "We need them." Like, we don't have it.
Yeah. See, and I didn't realize that system wasn't in place. I didn't realize I was in charge of that. So my fault. All right. You guys have some things to say about this. Hopefully, question number one, I'm going to take over to Andrew's team over here. If you have some thoughts that you'd like to bring up here. How is knowledge different from fact, and how is it the same?
Fact seems to be a definitive answer, whereas knowledge seems to be a more broad, in-depth meaning of something.
Okay, so broad and in-depth meaning of something, whereas facts seem to be more definitive.
Yes.
Okay, so we have some words here, broad versus definitive. Broad would entail that there's a lot of different things versus facts, which are kind of maybe just a correlation between two small things. I'm just kind of using your language to see if I can clarify. When you say knowledge kind of seems like this big thing, and facts seem to be like the small thing. That's what I hear you saying. Is that correct?
Pretty much.
Okay. And I think that's a interesting place to start. So what do you think? Is that I'll throw it out to the rest of the group for a second. That idea of big and small, is that an interesting place to start with this question? Knowledge is sort of overarching, and facts are kind of the small things and building blocks with it. Is that the only way that you would look at something like the differences between knowledge and fact?
I feel like there's fact, like I feel like you have to know the facts to have knowledge too. So I feel like it's kind of like how we were talking about the philosophy and the branch of philosophy the other day.
Right.
And it'd be like knowledge versus facts.
Okay, so then there's philosophy, if we're continuing with Kabir's model that he had established for us. Philosophy, the various sort of sub-disciplines of philosophy, epistemology, ethics, etc., etc. And then from there, you'd say that there'd be maybe a third level of facts.
Well, I was just saying thinking of a separate tree.
Okay, just a separate
Whereas
concept.
knowledge is there, and there's fact.
Knowledge, and then underneath knowledge would be these facts.
Yeah.
You're thinking of it as a separate tree. Okay, good. So perhaps just like the broadness versus the smallness, those smallness things, we need a lot of those to underwrite our concept of knowledge. It's an interesting way to visualize the differences. But what are the differences? I still haven't quite heard that yet. You want to continue with that? Anyone else in the team? What do you think the differences are between fact and knowledge? Hear it from the rest of the group, if possible, if anyone wants to jump in. I wish I could make a cricket sound. Just kidding. It's okay for silence, by the way. I'm not like worried about silence ever. Kabir.
I'm having a hard time myself coming to conclusion as to like, how they're different and how they're the same. But like I keep going over like the fact like if you look at Rene Descartes, he said I think only before I am before you or something, right?
Right.
And so he's trying to verify existence.
Mhm.
So, but yet there's a fact that you, in text or something, you say it's a fact that we are living and that we are breathing human beings, but yet he's still trying to verify existence. It's like, is that knowing? It's like, what is fact and what like something?
Right, no, and it's fine to be confused. I think that's a good thing to start. If you don't know something, don't necessarily need to be quiet. You can say, I don't know these differences. Is there something? And then what can you do of this question? Remember what we talked about the first day, practically. What could you do with this question? Ask another question. So do that. Whenever you feel like you don't have an answer to something, ask the question. So that's a good place to start. In fact, write that down right now in your notes. So whenever I ask you to do difficult things such as these weird kind of things that you've never done before, I know that, or you do them but in a different context, not in this weird philosophical context. If you don't know the answer to a question, because these questions are so sort of unknown right now, ask another question. It's not a problem. It's not a bad thing. In fact, it'll help us move our chess pieces, even if it is unwittingly. You don't realize you're doing so. It's going to help us clarify. So Kabir's absolutely right. When you don't know something, and he's saying that, he hears Descartes talk about verifying existence. Thank you, Kabir, for that's like you're like way advanced right now with that illusion. We'll talk about cogito ergo sum and what it means and what he meant by it. And verifying existence is a pretty intense concept. When you're talking about knowledge versus you're saying like it's a fact of our existence versus whether I know the fact. So we have these implicit requirements behind the word knowledge that we're still yet defined. That I know something versus somebody else telling me it's a fact, which is kind of what I hear you asking. Someone tells me it's a fact that I exist, and yet how do I know that I exist? And that would be the central question behind Descartes' dilemma. What is it to be? His dilemma is different, but we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Again, staying with the idea of knowledge and fact, you can even break down the words, to have something that's to know something versus what fact is. This might help us parse this out, and I'll maybe do one or two more people, and then I'll give you some more thoughts on it. Yes?
I think knowledge is more like opinionated and more personal than facts are.
Okay.
Because
How's that? Okay. Yeah, personal. Persons. So that might be the first start with our concept, is that knowledge requires who? I should say what or who. It's knowledge requires people. So that at least in the general term for knowledge, it's something that exists not in the world, but where? In your mind, yeah, in you, or whatever we conceive of a replacement of your mind, a brain or something. Knowledge is something that is in people. Facts are what we label statements out there that we can interact with. So that might be our first step in defining things. So I think it was good to do the visualizing and the broadness versus the specificity. But I think the third point of that is that we're also looking at that it's people versus intellectual stuff out there or statements out there that we can verify. We'll be doing a lot of that discussion. You'll be reading, when you get those books, to talk about theories of knowledge or theories of truth, kind of the very beginnings of verifying and figuring out how we look at and what theories are involved with how we know things to be true in the world. Bithia, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, knowledge can be gained from experience, and fact is and it's universal. And knowledge can also mean how you use the facts. If you
Perfect. I like that as well, because now you've taken knowledge and connecting it to that word that we talked about yesterday. That would be the subcategory of philosophy, which is epistemology. You take all these things that you know and you start putting them in certain order, either priorities, like I asked you to do yesterday. What's the most important area of knowing, or what's the most important thing about philosophy that you learned about yesterday? Well, obviously we can argue for any number of them being higher, lower, etc. But that's the goal of epistemology, is to categorize these things together. And in the same way, knowledge can also have that feeling of taking facts and putting them in a particular order. We order our facts based on like things, just like we order our species, our animals, dogs and cats. Dogs can have lots of variety, but we know what a dog is versus a cat. And in the same way, we do the same thing with facts. These facts go in science. These facts go in history. Now, does that mean that because we put them in those places that there's not overlap? Well, I think with everything, there's a certain level of commonality. But that's the goal of knowledge, and that might be different than facts. I think that's another good point to bring up with this. You also mentioned something about knowledge being subjective. I can't remember exactly what you said. You said something along the lines of knowledge being personal. You didn't say personal, but you said something along those lines.
gain from experience.
Gain from experience. Thank you. That's what I was trying to remember. Gain from experience. Yeah, and so you have knowledge that is maybe just knowledge that you know. That goes to Descartes a little bit, but there's things about you, not to be creepy, but there's things about you that only you know, right? And is that knowledge, even though those facts aren't public knowledge? The concept of privacy. We're losing privacy in a general sense of the word as we move forward, but knowledge itself can be gained personally and be a personal thing as well. So that's sometimes different than facts that are known generally. Okay, we've done that question. Let's move on from there. So knowledge, we know kind of differences a little bit. At least the first start, knowledge and fact. Number 2, the universe was devoid of intelligent life. If the universe, it was devoid of intelligent life, would there be knowledge? Yes or no? Let's start with this general section. Someone like to throw out a concept or a start. Go ahead, Caitlin.
I have a question.
Perfect.
So, what is intelligent? Is it something with the brain, or just everything that's living?
Great. So, what is intelligence? And that would be maybe your first clarifying question to answering. So, if I were to, maybe just to move it along a little bit, intelligent life, for how I conceived of this question, would be something along the lines of things that are aware, are self-aware, and are making decisions that we would all universally accept as knowledge. So they themselves are possessing knowledge to a certain extent. So the question is, if there is an intelligent life, there is an sentient being, a being that's self-aware, do we no longer have knowledge? Or can we say that knowledge is no longer in existence in the world? There's no knowing going on. Yes?
I feel like the entity of knowledge would still be there. There would still be things to know, but there would be no one to know them, so I don't think there would be knowledge.
So you said the entity, so I'd say the object, so that's the same, I think that's what you mean by that. The object of knowing would still be there, those objects to know, but no one to know it. This would be this would be an important, make us define knowledge so specifically on intelligence and having sentience, meaning animals, even though they're not perfectly sentient, I shouldn't even say that, there shouldn't even be animals in this, because then we could argue about intelligence in a variety of spectrums. There's no animal life at all. Should be plants on there? Are plants sentient? Because can plants know things? I don't know. Maybe in a chemical way they can think something.
Well, it'd be the same
But then can rocks know things? I mean, do you know what I mean though? Like chemical reactions, is that
So
knowledge?
no earth.
I'm blowing my own mind. Hold on.
It's just black space now.
Yeah.
Knowledge.
Well, yeah. Do rocks know things? That's often what we hear. We hear about. It was an old. Who was it? I'm gonna do a misquote here, but I think somebody.
What you just said sounds like it should have been in the book. Do rocks know?
No. And I'm totally stealing that from somebody. You can write. You can find. If someone has their phone out, like Emma. Nothing is what rocks dream of. That's a quote, and I don't know who said it. I'm gonna say it's either Plato or Alvin Plantinga, and I think both of them are wrong. So that seems to be kind of a philosopher tone that you would say nothing is what rocks dream of. But do rocks know things? Chemically, whatever. I don't know. Geologically, they know stuff.
Theologically.
If you think about it though, all of your knowledge, if you think about it in a purely materialistic way, all of your knowledge is what? Totally scientifically or materialistically. Your knowledge is what? What is the stuff of your knowledge? Think of it like electrical charges in your brain, some type of fluid that is maintaining your memories, your motor skills, the pock marks on your brain that are holding that, all those things that keep your body from collapsing like a bunch of broccoli, like Victor says. So that's an interesting idea, and that'll also leave us on the idea. So we'll maintain that right now. That question that Kaylin suggests: what is intelligence, and what does it mean to have knowledge? Is this something that is outside of the natural realm, or is it purely contained in it, or contained in all natural processes? Meaning, is there a mind, or is there only a brain? That tends to be the main dichotomy that we discuss. And that'll go to when we start with Mr. Descartes and other philosophers that discussed questions like that. All right, number 3, what is the relationship between the knower and knowledge? So as a final conclusion there, what is the relationship between the knower and knowledge? You guys, give us some thoughts. The relationship between knower and knowledge.
Well, I think it's kind of like Kim said earlier, that knowledge is something that you can generate from your own experience. The knower has to go out and experience life in order to know.
Right. We start in some places, and especially in TOK, we start with the knower. And the knower is an entity, it's an individual who is at once able to receive information and contribute. As you said, you develop these experiences and contribute knowing to others. So that is, I think, the biggest thing about it. So part of what I'm trying to get us to do right now with this is knowing that, number 1, facts, when we say the word fact, it's oftentimes used in place of more soft language that would require us to accept the fact that there are other who in the world? Other knowers who have also decided that these facts are correct. And so we begin to think about knowledge in a personal way, not in I know all these facts in the world. Life is not Jeopardy. That's kind of what I'm suggesting here. Knowledge is not Jeopardy, although those people are very, very smart and they know a lot of things, but it's not an accumulation of random fact. When I discuss and make real worldview decisions about what I believe, why I believe it in the world, and what I think is important, and what right behavior I think is founded in truth, I recognize that all of you have similar goals in mind, and you are also persons that I need to contend with. Not contend with in a combative way, but contend with in a compassionate way. And so that's where theory of knowledge to me meets true application, that Tao of TOK, that you're not just thinking of, if only I had more information than others, I could be smarter than them, I could be better than them, etc. And that's kind of where I go with things. It's kind of, you'll hear my big theme in life is not to be, as much as possible, not to be that guy who everyone, is so snobby or something like that. I want to make sure I am able to relate to people no matter where they're at. And that requires a lot of knowledge on my part, because then I need to be thinking about others as much as myself. Okay, so that's what I think the knower and knowledge is, that I can recognize where other people are in their journey in knowledge. And then also it gives me a nice humility as well, because I don't know everything, and there are people who know way more than I do, and I've already said that. So let's move on. All right, so I've been kind of referencing this. Kabir offered concepts. Kaylin just now and Emma also offering some concepts and visualizations for us. Here is the official one. You'll find this in the TOK textbook. This is the universal IB learner profile for TOK. So this is something that you will need to work with and interact with, particularly because they're going to assess you on it. So in your internal and external assessment. So go ahead and just sketch this out right now. I know you don't have your textbooks yet, but you should just eventually begin committing this to memory. The other thing, so we'll be doing 2 projects with this throughout the course of the year, and I don't want to start them off right now because I don't want to overwhelm you. I want you just to do your notes. I want you to work on your other classes, and we will come back to this. But eventually we'll be doing a project in which you contribute to a Prezi together as a class, a collaborative Prezi, in which you are putting in pictures and thoughts about each one of these as you learn them in your different disciplines. So when you learn some aspect of knowledge from your other classes, you'll be putting it into a large Prezi in those areas. So we'll create little branch family trees on each of these areas of knowing. Okay, the second project we'll be doing is trying to completely erase this profile and making you construct a completely different one. If in the course of the class you decide you disagree, or at least you can argue that you can disagree with this profile that I'm using, that'll be your chance to show off your ability to disagree. You can say something different. I don't think the knower should be in the middle. I think he should be here. I think this is more important, so I'm going to have this be a bigger word. Essentially, you'll be creating a new visualization of the way in which knowledge operates. Let's go ahead and just start with what we should know in order to do well in the class. Okay, so what people are going to assess you on. Top-down authority stuff. First of all, you notice what's in the center. Okay, what do you notice about that word, its construction, the shape around it, etc., etc.? Okay, it's a hexagon. That's good. So the shape around it is a hexagon. So there's some type of maybe something different than the circles around this. It seems like it's a different thing. What else about maybe the way that this is constructed versus this middle line? Okay, so it seems like there's a definiteness to this shape versus this dashed line. So what might that symbolize? Looking at my art history students, you should know all about symbolism and aesthetic qualities and making assumptions. March, there you go. Meaning aesthetic. You guys remember all of it? Were you? Oh, yeah. What do you think the dash, okay, so what do you think the dash line might represent? Something to do with continuity. That's good.
Maybe you could go back and forth, in the street where it's like a dash line, you can go
There
back
you
and
go.
forth.
You're using association. That's good. So something, this seems like you can kind of weave back and forth, whereas this, you're not supposed to go in and out of because it's this solid shape. Okay, I'm going to come back to that for a second. The word knower in bold, and then look, it has this nice little parentheses S there, just in case you need to talk about other knowers. First question of TOK, the Descartes question, is how do I know that I'm a knower? How do I know that you're all knowers? It's kind of a matrix question, but I could say that I'm the only knower in the world and you are all figments of my knowledge myself. It's kind of egocentrical, but there's people living today with a certain, like, there's a certain form of schizophrenia that has that view that everything around me is merely projections because they can't discern the two. And that you're all living as sort of robots to my edification. It's a selfish way to look at things. But it is a central question. How do I know that there's other knowers out there besides myself? And so that's why that's in parentheses there. It's letting us know that contingency. That we know that there's a knower, but the question is, who is the knower? Are there more than one knower, etc.? So that's some interesting starting questions. Hexagon here, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 6 different sides. I don't know if that relates to anything except for maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 6 different areas of knowing, so perhaps it has something to do with that. Let's start with the second tier outside of our circle. Kind of looks like an atom, this whole thing. But the middle area is the ways of knowing, so that's going to be your second sort of category. We know things through means. And these means have 4 different names: emotion, reason, language, and sense perception. And I think there's a very important reason why we have a solid line here. What do you think that reason is? You ever, as opposed to this being a dotted line. Our ways of knowing are fundamentally separate from the knowledge that we possess, or I should say the knower inside of us. At some level there is a barrier between me and my senses, me and reason, me and my emotions, and me and my language. And this is sort of widely accepted or universally accepted as an important thing. Can you always, for instance, trust your senses? Can your senses ever deceive you? Do your senses necessarily mean that you would truly know something? And this is where we at least make the initial caveat that yes, even my senses, which tend to be, I'm just using that as a first one because we think of our senses as the most reliable of knowing. We kind of use it as much as possible, even beyond other aspects. Perhaps with teenagers, which is the way of knowing we use the most. Emotion. I know this because of right. All right. So we'll debate on what are the best ways of knowing versus the worst, and if that's even possible. Obviously, it doesn't show that here. All 4 of these are equal in their importance according to the profile. Now, there is overlap. There is that ability to absorb the 2 ways of knowing into areas of knowing. So we take our ways of knowing, which are like our tools, to go into the areas of knowing, which is our collected understandings of each discipline. And this is easy because we know them because you have period 1 and period 2 and period 3, and they're all nicely separated for you. You are products of an education system that has said human sciences is different than the natural sciences. Biology is different than physics. Physics is different than English. And we understand these things because there's so many facts, there's so much knowing that can be happening in those areas that we decide we need a teacher that only does this, right? And so areas of knowing will be distinct changes in types of learning that you need to do. So history, human sciences, natural sciences, mathematics, ethics, and the arts. Now, even though you have different periods of these things, number one, what's missing out of your education that's on these areas of knowing? What don't you have right now in your education? Okay, you don't have an ethics class. Ouch. We're going to be producing a bunch of people who know a lot but don't know how to not kill people. No, I don't know. All these murderers because you haven't taken ethics. What else? Do you guys have a human sciences? Anthropology, psychology. Anyone have a psychology class? You'll have an economics class, which is sort of a human sciences. You guys have a history class. All right, so that's probably the big one there is that you're missing ethics. Anyone not have an